who purport to be Islamic murder people of all faiths. Those of you here today, you understand this better than most. You understand that because you are Muslims, and because you are American Muslims, you have suffered the consequences of this violent extremism in a way that the rest of us will never know. As Americans, you are targeted by Al-Qaeda and its affiliates, just like every other American. Indeed, we should never forget that terrorist attacks on our nation, including the 9/11 attacks, have also taken the lives of many American Muslims, innocent men, women, and children, whose lives were lost simply because they too were American citizens. And had that attack succeeded on December 25th, it could have cost the lives of all those individuals, those innocents on the aircraft, as well as the lives of many innocents on the ground in Detroit, which is home to so many Muslim and Arab Americans. As Muslims, you have seen a small fringe of fanatics who cloak themselves in religion, try to distort your faith, though they are clearly ignorant of the most fundamental teachings of Islam. Instead of finding the inherent dignity and decency in other human beings, they practice a medieval brand of intolerance. Instead of saving human lives, as the Quran instructs, they take innocent life. Instead of creating, they destroy, bombing mosques, schools, and hospitals. They are not jihadists, for jihad is a holy struggle, an effort to purify for a legitimate purpose. And there is nothing, absolutely nothing, holy or pure or legitimate or Islamic about murdering innocent men, women, and children. And so devout Muslims like you, as well as members of other faiths, have frequently been forced to defend and define your faith. And this can be especially hard when so many people develop such a distorted view of Islam, because too often the only time they read and hear about your faith is in the context of Al-Qaeda and terrorism. As families with relatives and friends around the world, you know that it is actually Muslims who have suffered most at the bloody hands of violent extremism. It is your Muslim brothers and sisters from Afghanistan and Pakistan, from the Sahel to South Asia, who have paid the highest price. As one study recently noted, in recent years, nearly all of Al-Qaeda's victims, indeed 98%, have been innocents from Muslim countries. Thousands of men, women, and children. And as the Quran reveals, never should a believer kill a believer. And if he does, the wrath and the curse of God are upon him. As parents, it is your sons and daughters, young people the age of students here today, who are being targeted by Al-Qaeda and its hateful ideology. Until recently, some thought that this challenge was for other countries, where Muslims had often not assimilated or been accepted into mainstream society. But as we have seen here in recent months, Al-Qaeda seeks to steal the souls of young people in America as much as they seek to steal them overseas. In this sense, Al-Qaeda is not unlike drug lords, gang leaders, or human traffickers, preying on the confused and the vulnerable, who are perhaps struggling with their own identity and seeking a sense of belonging, brainwashing them with a false promise of paradise and using them instead as cannon fodder for their own murderous agenda. And so, increasingly, American Muslims, mothers and fathers, face the challenge of protecting their own sons and daughters. As communities, you have also been targeted from the other side by inexcusable ignorance and prejudice here in the United States, Europe, and elsewhere. Each of you, no doubt, has your own story, many stories. We know that it is not only the Muslim community who has been singled out, but also those perceived to be Muslim or perceived to be different: Arab, Sikh, South Asian. In the wake of the Fort Hood tragedy and the attempted attack over Detroit, we've seen an ugly rise in scapegoating and fear-mongering. Yet the true character of America was on display when Army Chief of Staff General Casey went on national television and said so eloquently after the Fort Hood attack that in our Army and in our America, our diversity is our strength, and our diversity cannot become a casualty of such an incident. President Obama declared in his address in Cairo that he considers it part of his responsibility as president to fight against negative stereotypes of Islam. This is not only a matter of civil rights, it's a matter of our national security, and it's a matter of our morality as a nation. Hostility and harassment toward American Muslims and toward members of other faiths or other backgrounds or other races plays right into the hands of violent extremists. It reinforces the misguided notion that American Muslims are somehow separate from, rather than a part of America. It creates an atmosphere of suspicion and mistrust that discourages dialogue and cooperation with law enforcement. And it increases the chances that a kid growing up in America who is perhaps struggling with issues of his own will become captivated by extremist ideologies. So it is very clear. Ignorance is a threat to our national security. Prejudice is a threat to our national security. Discrimination is a threat to our national security. And those who purport to be religious are frequently the most egregious purveyors of ignorance, prejudice, and discrimination. And it must stop. In the spirit of candor, we must also acknowledge that over the years, the actions of our own government have at times perpetuated those attitudes. Violations of the Patriot Act, surveillance that has been excessive, policies perceived as profiling, over-inclusive no-fly lists, subjecting law-abiding individuals to unnecessary searches and inconvenience, creating an unhelpful atmosphere around many Muslim charities that made Muslims hesitant to fulfill their sacred obligation of zakat. These are challenges we face together as Americans. And President Obama and his administration are pursuing a comprehensive approach to address them. This approach is rooted in the President's vision of America's role in the world. Since taking office, he has made it a priority to uphold our values and our highest ideals, not only because they keep us true to who we are as a nation, but because they make it more likely that other nations will partner with us for our common security. That's why President Obama prohibited torture and the mistreatment of individuals in custody, and why he remains committed to closing the prison at Guantanamo Bay. The President has made it clear that we will define our country not simply by what we are against, but by what we are for. The opportunities, the liberties, the common aspirations we share with people around the world. Rather than simply focusing on ties between governments, he has pursued a broader agenda and engagement with people on issues that are most important to them: economic development, education, health, good governance, and the dignity of every human being, including the fulfillment of women's rights. We see this in his outreach to the Muslim community around the world. He is the first person to use the inaugural address to speak directly to Muslims. He has spoken to people directly in his interviews on Al Arabiya and on Dawn TV in Pakistan, in his message on Nowruz, and of course his speeches in Ankara and Cairo, where he pledged a new beginning with Muslim communities based on mutual interest and mutual respect. And this weekend, the President is addressing Muslims from around the world, including representatives from some of your organizations, in videotape remarks to the U.S. Islamic World Forum in Doha, where Secretary Clinton will be attending. He's reaffirming the commitments he made in Cairo, including his unyielding pursuit of peace between Israelis and Palestinians. He's highlighting the many new partnerships that he promised in Cairo and that have already begun. Initiatives to promote economic development, education, science and technology, and public health. And in a sign of his continued commitment, the President is announcing that a member of his White House legal staff, known to many of you, Rashad Hussain, will serve as a special envoy to the organization of the Islamic Conference. This same spirit of partnership is needed to confront the challenge of violent extremism. And the President's approach has three main components: defeating al-Qaeda and its allies, confronting the broader challenge of violent extremism generally, and safeguarding our homeland in a manner that both protects our security as well as our values. First, defeating al-Qaeda and its allies. the President has been very clear about who we are fighting. We are not waging a war against terrorism because terrorism is but a tactic that will never be defeated any more than the tactic of war will. Rather, such thinking is a recipe for endless conflict. We are not at war against terror because terror is a state of mind. And as President Obama has said, as Americans, we refuse to live in fear, and we will not. Rather, we are focused on defeating and destroying al-Qaeda and its violent extremist allies. We are at war with al-Qaeda and its extremist allies, and any comment to the contrary is just inaccurate. We will destroy that organization. And that is why President Obama is responsibly ending the war in Iraq, which had nothing to do with 9/11,